So we'll start with our fictional Jill and Jack, and Jill is in charge of sales. She's a leader, and Jack, her colleague, is in charge of operations. Okay, and they have, the first stage of escalated conflict, there's 9 obviously, is that they have a disagreement, or they have a falling out, or actually somebody could hurt someone else's feelings. That happens a lot. People don't come into work and say, gee, Jack hurt my feelings, but they will come into work and they'll say, Jack is a jerk. Does that make sense? Okay, they'll talk about it in an angry way, instead of saying really what the truth is that they feel discounted. That's what they feel. Okay, so if we were highly skilled, we would probably talk to each other. And I can't tell you how many times when I've talked to somebody about an escalated conflict and they'll tell me a story and I'll say, well, what did you do? Did you reach out to that person? Did you have a conversation? Did you tell them? And they'll say, of course, they'll say, no, I didn't. That's why they're in escalated conflict. So they go into avoidance instead. But that's a really tricky thing in the workplace. Might be easier to do with your Aunt Sally, to avoid her. But in the workplace, that doesn't really work because their work is interdependent. Does that make sense? And they have to communicate at some level. Okay, so avoid, and then because they're working together, they start making assumptions about what the other person's doing. I mean, they might be polite. They might say good morning. They might say, how was your kid's soccer game this weekend? But when it really comes down to tough issues that are related to work, they are avoiding each other because it's too scary. Okay? And then they get to this part, which is they say, I need to vent. Now, how many of you have heard that venting is a good thing? That venting helps us? Yes, it's a very common belief. But the research says now that it actually makes us more aggressive when we vent. And what I mean by venting is something very, very specific. Venting sounds like this. Oh my gosh, can you believe what Jack did? Jack is such a attention grabber. He's always embarrassing me. He tries, he just waits to see if he can trip me up in front of a staff meeting or in front of, in the board meet. And don't you agree that everyone in his department is like that? I mean, they're all just kind of, control freaks. What's bad about that form of venting is that it's very personality based. Lots of name calling and labeling. Does that make sense? Okay, so my conversation when I did that was about Jack and his personality and a name calling, and then I expanded it and said everyone in the group has that same problem. Don't you agree? That's the negative side of that venting piece. Okay, so what I'm subtly doing is recruiting you to join my faction. Okay, and we're going to, and if you say yes, oh, Anna, I have problems with Jack too, now we really got a problem, don't we? Because now I'm thinking, not only am I having a problem with Jack, everybody I talk to seems to be having a problem with Jack. And now I feel like I've got the weight of the world on my shoulders, and that it's not just me. I have to, take Jack down, not only for myself, but for everybody I've talked to or everybody in my group. Now, what's helpful is not venting. What's helpful is problem solving, which is I go to somebody and I ask for a few minutes and I'll try not to demonize Jack. I won't call him names. I won't make it up that there's something that's about his personality that we can't fix, and so therefore we're justified in being aggressive towards him. And I won't recruit you in a faction against Jack. What I'll actually be doing is describing accurately and factually what happened, and then saying, and then asking you to help me problem solve what I should do next, which is most likely to go talk to Jack. Okay, so there's 2 different things here. But most people have felt justified, in going, and saying, I need to vent, close the door. In fact, I used to work at an organization where my boss used to do that all the time, where I'd go in to complain about her boss about something he'd done, and she would actually say, close the door. And what does that mean? Yeah, we're going to badmouth her boss, right? In fact, she was so dedicated to this that she had a drawer in her desk that she kept memos and emails, dumb things Dave has done. And she'd pull this big stack of, stuff out and plop it on the desk, and we'd go through it together. Okay, so, all right. what we know, though, is vending is a little tricky thing because it's fun and it's funny. You'll see that in a few minutes. It's easy, it's quick, it takes no work, does it? Blah, 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 you know, Jack, blah, 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 Jack, blah, blah. Oh, my, I can't stand Jack, blah, blah, right? But what we're going to see today, it leads to no resolution. It really leaves us in a black hole. And it's going to get worse. Okay, so now we got Jill turning around over here. She's upset with Jack, and Jack's upset with her. And she's turning around, and she's building a faction. So she's going out, and she's doing a very subtle or sometimes very obvious campaign against Jack. You know, about don't you all agree that either Jack or everyone in his department, you know, is really hard to work with. We, on the other hand, we are innocent. We get along really well over here. Okay, so it's all the problems over there. Jack's doing exactly the same thing. Now, notice that the conversations aren't about the problem, they're about the person. That's one of going to be our biggest goals today, is to become aware of when we're actually talking about the problem in the situation and when we've shifted our thinking and we begin talking about personality in people. Because when we do that, there's no resolution. You know, if I decide that I'm upset with Jack because Jack is a control freak and he's an attention grabber, then where do I go next? I have no next step, do I? I have to wait for Jack to change, and we don't really expect him to change, do we? So then I justify my withdrawal, and I look for comfort in my faction. Okay, so and notice they're talking about the personality, not the problem. Okay? Then we know sooner or later this gossip or this, you know, these attacks are going to leak outside from their faction, right? We know that's going to spread. Okay, the research says that most of us belong to more than one faction. The only person that doesn't join factions is typically the president or the CEO. Everyone else is kind of trying to find their little support group, you know, where they can feel safe and they can vent and they can get, you know, the information about what's going on in the organization. But what's happening here is somebody from Jill's faction is down here, and this is kind of funny, but it's really true. I've seen this happen many times where she goes to a conference or she goes to a workshop and she runs into somebody from Jack's faction. So say Jill's in sales, Jack's in operations, they run into each other at a conference or their kids play soccer together, someplace outside of work. They see each other and they start exchanging this information about what's being said inside their group, right? And for both of them, you know, so here's the person from Jill's faction. She's kind of creating a new faction right now. She's breaking rank. She's sort of abandoning her sales faction, and she's kind of bonding over here with this guy from Jack's group. And she's sharing this gossip. And of course, what's he going to do? What does he do? He reciprocates, right? He talks about what's going on in his group and what they say about Jill. Okay, so once this information has started leaking between their factions, what is this woman going to do? What do you suspect she's going to do with the knowledge that she has? She's going to take it back to Jill. Exactly. And her counterpart over here, the next morning in a staff meeting, so here they are, nasty, I can't wait. Or it doesn't even have to wait to the staff meeting. Here they are on their phones calling their bosses saying, oh my gosh, you can't believe what's being said. I don't think this is malicious. I think they're trying to warn their leader or warn their colleague, you know, watch out for Jill, watch out for Jack. Okay? So poor Jill and Jack, look at their hair. Their hair just stands on end. Right? And they both feel betrayed. So when Jack hears what Jill's been saying about him, you know, that he's a control freak, you know, he's hurt, deeply hurt. And when Jill hears that she's been called a man crusher in the organization, she's devastated. So now we're only at, you know, what are we at? Stage 4. And this is going to be really tough for the two of them to resolve this. Stage 5, I guess we were. Okay, so now the mistrust has spread to their groups. It's not just Jill and Jack anymore. It's their whole groups are involved. Sales doesn't talk to operations and vice versa. There's a invisible wall in their organization. And I really want to say this again. I don't believe it's malice. I don't believe these are bad people. I was caught up in several of these when I worked before I started my own business, and I think we just don't know any better. Okay, and it's a byproduct of escalated conflict. Now, it could go to stage 7. In fact, it almost always does, where Jill and Jack are taking turns going in to the person in blue. The person in blue is an authority figure. Could be the board, it could be the CEO, it could be the vice president. Some cases, it's been in conflicts that I've worked in, it was the newspaper that they were calling up and they were complaining about the other group because it was a hospital that had public funding and they were accusing the other faction of stealing. So the newspaper got involved. So that person in blue, they don't know what to do. They have zero training in what to do in this area. So they end up saying things like, well, can't you both just get along? That's what they end up saying. And Jack and Jill both feel victimized, but they're both behaving like bullies at this point. All right, it might go to the A stage of escalated conflict where the authority figure or the person in blue decides to terminate. And for a moment there, everybody has sort of a sigh of relief. Oh, thank heavens, it's over. That was really tough. Even the people in Jack's faction are sort of relieved that Jack is gone because that means maybe they can heal again. But then I discovered that Jack really doesn't go away, does he? So here's Jack on the peripheral. So I've interviewed several people where, we're trying to mop up after an escalated conflict, and they'll say to me, yeah, I talked to Jack 2 weeks ago. And I'm like, what? Jack's been gone for 1.5 years. Oh, where did you talk to Jack? So you want to take a guess? Where was she talking to Jack? Soccer game. She and her colleagues were meeting Jack, what we call from afar and in the bar. And what's the point of these meetings? Why would Jack still be in contact with his former direct reports? What's he up to? Getting back at Jill, trying to reestablish his relationship in the industry or in the community, right? So, what does this cost? Well, when we've polled our attendees that have gone through the class, they'll tell us, and because we ask them this, what do you estimate you're spending your time on, in these escalated conflicts and what we'll see later this morning, cycles of contempt, cycles of mistrust, we put them up on the wall. What percent of your time do you think you're spending on escalated conflict that's not been addressed in your workplace? And they consistently over the past 10 years have said between 30 and 50%. Now that's the peak. That's the average. Okay. So because here's the tricky part. The behaviors that destroy trust in the organization, they're so common. They seem so benign. They seem so innocent. You got a minute? I got to tell you what Jack did. Okay? And this is one of the big ones. Okay? So that's the goal of the seminar, is to make these mistakes that are so common and seem benign, to make them and their consequences visible. So we can preempt some of these escalated conflicts because they are tragic in their cost.